today's video, I'm going to be covering the top 5 contenders in the AFC. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So before we get into my official top 5, I do want to hand out one honorable mention, and that team is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers. They were seriously considered for this video. In fact, they are like really neck and neck with my number 5 team. Ultimately, though, I still have some question marks with this offense and a couple question marks about the defense. I still think it's going to be a great team that probably will end up making the playoffs, and they could make a run. With that said, let's enter into our top 5. At number 5, I have the Houston Texans. Now, as I mentioned, the Texans and the Chargers were like neck and neck for me. I honestly could have gone either way. But in general, I just have a little bit more faith in this Texans defense than I do with the Chargers defense. And that's primarily because I just think the Texans defense is a lot more talented than the Chargers. I still think the Chargers could have like a top 5 defense next year. I just kind of think the Texans might be up to par or just as good, and I still have a little bit more faith in that offense more so than I do with the Chargers. Again, it's very close. It's like splitting hairs here, so just kind of keep that in mind. But when it comes to the Houston Texans, last year was not the prettiest of years. The offensive line really held this team back, and of course the offensive coordinator got fired at the end of the season, and I think he was pretty justified. It was kind of a shame that he went out there and had a great first year with the team, and then second year just was a complete disaster. This upcoming season, though, you get a new offensive coordinator. It's now year 3 for CJ Stroud. I still think the offensive line is not very good, but I think it's, I guess, maybe slightly better, if not maybe a little bit worse than what it was last year. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. Hopefully, though, with the new offensive coordinator, the offensive line can just, keep it up and be okay. In terms of weapons, there's a lot of weapons to work with. 2 new rookies, of course, Nico Collins, and hopefully at some point Tank Dell. I love their receiving core. Dalton Schultz at tight end, Joe Mixon at running back. I think there's a really good supporting cast around CJ. And then defensively, I think you're talking about a potential top 5 to top 7 defense in the NFL. So you put that all together, if this Texans offense can be like top half of the league with a top 5 to top 7 defense, you're talking about a team that can generally make a potential deep playoff run. I will say the one thing that is holding me back on this Texans team, and I have to go back to it, is that offensive line. It feels like it's kind of their Achilles heel, especially when they get towards the playoffs, when you go up against the likes of the Buffalo Bills or the Kansas City Chiefs or the Baltimore Ravens, which are all teams that can consistently get after the quarterback because they have a premier top-end talent or they have waves of pass rushers. The Chiefs have a Chris Jones and a George Karlaftis. The Ravens have a Kyle Van Noy. They just drafted Mike Green, and they have waves of guys that can get after you. The Bills, I think, probably have maybe the worst pass rushing defensive line of the 3 that I talked about, but they have waves of guys that can come after the quarterback, and I just have a hard time seeing this Texans offensive line stepping up to the plates. However, if the offensive coordinator can kind of work around this Texans offensive line, provide extra bodies in pass protection, shift the unit a lot, allow CJ Stroud to have a bit more control of the offensive line, and if he does a good job, then maybe that offensive line could take a step forward and it won't be that big of a concern. But just in general, I do believe this Texans team has all the pieces to become an actual title contender. It just kind of comes down to that offensive line. So again, if they can check that box, I think they have the defense to go very far, and I think they have the offense and the quarterback more specifically to make a relatively deep playoff run. I don't think they're quite up there with some of the other teams on this list. Like, I think from here, there's a kind of a bit of a drop off between 4 to 5, but I do think the Texans are still in the conversation. They're still in the bubble, which is all that you could ask for. By the way, I know I'm wearing a Houston hat. I'm not a Texans fan, so for any Chargers fans that are mad, I'm not a Texans fan. Moving over to number 4, I have the Denver Broncos. Now, the Denver Broncos are one of my favorite teams and one of the more exciting teams to watch this upcoming season because I truly think they have one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the entire NFL. If you guys watched my top 10 defense video, I believe I had the Broncos ranked number 1. By the way, you should watch that video. I'll have it pinned up at the very end. A couple of the teams on this list, of course, are going to be in that video. But this Broncos defense was already really good last year, and in my opinion, it got significantly better by adding in a Dre Greenlaw, a Talanoa Hufanga, adding Jahdae Barron to the mix. And then on the offensive end, it's a pretty similar unit to last year, but they have a stellar offensive line. You add in an RJ Harvey, a Pat Bryant, and Evan Ingram, and I think for the most part, that offense could take a small step forward. Now, emphasis on small step forward. I do think that is what's going to hold them back from entering into those top end conversations like the next 3 teams, just because I do believe this offense will be better. But in my personal opinion, to be a title favorite, not a contender, but a favorite to win the title, you have to have a top 8 to top 10 offense and a top 8 to top 10 defense. And while I think they have the defensive box checked off, I just don't know if I can say this offense will be top 10 next year. Now, maybe this defense will just be so dominant that even if it's not a top 10 offense, they'll be totally fine just being a good offense. maybe that could be the case. But in my opinion, in this kind of new 2020s era of football, I think you have to have a good blend of both, especially when you're competing against the likes of the top 3 teams, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. But for the Broncos, though, if you do believe in Bo Nix and his development and that he's just going to get better and better, and next year will be a nice big step forward with some new pieces around him, with a great offensive line, a great play caller, and then a defense that should be like top 3 in the NFL, then yeah, I think you can make a conversation about the Broncos being legit contenders. It will be a battle for probably the first time in Patrick Mahomes' career for the division. I don't think it's just going to be given to the Chiefs like it has been in past years. I truly think that he is going to have to work for it when you have the likes of the Broncos, who are my number 4 team, the Chargers, which are my number 6 team, and then there's the Raiders, who I kind of think are an underrated team that may end up pushing for that 7th or 6th seed if things go their way. So again, I don't think that it's just going to be the Chiefs division. I could easily see the Broncos winning this division and potentially winning a handful of playoff games. And you never know, maybe they win enough to make it to a Super Bowl. That'd be a crazy story, but we'll just have to wait and see. Moving over to my number 3, and I think for the most part, everyone knows the teams that are in my top 3, but it will be interesting to see how I kind of ordered them. But at my number 3, I do have the Buffalo Bills. Now, in terms of the Bills, I still think as long as they have Josh Allen under center, with a decent enough supporting cast to surround him, I always think they're going to be a playoff contender and even a potential Super Bowl contender. And that's just because of how good and how much I believe in Josh Allen. I do think Josh Allen is the 2nd or 3rd or maybe even the best quarterback in the NFL. It's really tough to rank him amongst the likes of Joe Burrow, Mahomes, and Lamar, but I think Josh Allen is firmly in the mix as the top guy. So offensively, I think they have a good offensive line. I think they have a good running back in James Cook. I think they have good weapons that, can fit the system that they're working in with Khalil Shakur. Hopefully, Keon Coleman can take a step forward, and they brought in a few other guys. 2 solid tight ends and a decent play caller. I do think this offense will be a top 5-ish offense next year. And then defensively, I still don't think it's like the greatest unit in the world. I think it definitely has some flaws to it, but they added a lot to that defensive line. Like I think they added like 4 or 5 pieces to it, because I think they're kind of wanting to take an approach similar to Philadelphia, where we may not have one guy that can consistently get after the quarterback. In the case of Philadelphia, they kind of did with Josh Sweat and Jalen Carter, but I think the Buffalo Bills are kind of taking a bit of a page out of their book, but not the entirety of it, where they say, we may not have a guy who can consistently get after the quarterback, but we're going to have 4 guys on the defensive line that can get after the quarterback. And then once those guys come out, we're going to have 4 different guys come in that can do the exact same thing. You add in a Joey Bosa, a Michael Ho, a Larry Ogunjobi. They drafted some people as well. And then you still have the guys you had from last year. I think it's a great lesson for this team to learn after last year not really being able to do so against Patrick Mahomes. This year, they should have waves of guys that can get after the quarterback. Now, we'll see if they can ultimately get to Patrick Mahomes when it comes down to the playoffs, because let's be honest, if the Bills want to make that Super Bowl appearance, they're probably going to end up having to face the Chiefs at some point in that run, whether it's in the AFC Championship game or in the divisional round. They'll probably face them at some point. And so for the Bills, you have to overcome that obstacle. You've been able to do so in the regular season, but that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Can you do it in the playoffs? So because they've put a bit more of an interest and focus in on that defensive line, I do think they actually have a better chance of beating the Chiefs this year than in past years. It's ultimately just going to come down to, can this team stay healthy? And when they do get to the playoffs, what do they look like? Are they clicking and operating at a high level? Are they taking a step back? What does the coaching situation look like? And if they can answer those questions with flying colors, I think the Buffalo Bills have a legit shot to win the whole thing. Again, they just have to answer those smaller questions for me. And if they can do so, then I'll give it to them. I think they can totally win it. Again, it's just really difficult when you are going up against the likes of the Chiefs and even the Broncos potentially, or some of these other rosters that are really talented. It's not going to be an easy journey for the Buffalo Bills. But moving over to number 2, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs got embarrassed in the Super Bowl. We all know the story. Patrick Mahomes went out there, looked confident as ever, and then he got put in the dirt over and over and over again. And the Philadelphia Eagles ended up winning by double digits. Definitely not the end that the Chiefs wanted for their quest to, I think it was a 3-peat opportunity. Yeah, definitely not what they wanted. But what I will say, as long as you have Mahomes, as long as you still have any version of Kelsey, and as long as you have an Andy Reid and a really, really good defense, you're always going to be in contention. Now, this past offseason, I don't think they got significantly better because they did lose a couple pieces. I just don't think the pieces they lost were all that significant. They were able to maintain a Nick Bolton, able to keep a Trey Smith. Losing out on Keeping Joe Tooney was obviously a big loss, and then losing out on Justin Reed. Those are obviously big losses, but I still think for the most part, I'm okay with this unit. I'm not too worried about what they did ultimately lose. I think they'll be totally fine. I think of the losses, the Tooney loss will be the most significant one because he's been a staple of that offensive line at the left guard spot. And without him there, it's kind of unfortunate because he was ultimately able to play a lot of different roles for this offense. And he's gonna be big time missed next year. And I want to say this: I think people that are just glossing over that loss and saying, "Oh well, we kept Trey Smith, we drafted Josh Simmons, we also brought in the dude from Jalen Moore as well." Like, I get it. I understand that you have those pieces, but I do think losing a Joe Tooney is a massive loss, and it's going to be very difficult to replace that production, especially when you're talking about an unproven piece in a Kingsley who's working for a spot, an unproven piece in Josh Simmons who's working back from an injury, an unproven piece from Jalen Moore who has been a backup his whole career. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how that left side of the offensive line works out for Kansas City. It probably won't show an ugly face in the regular season just because they can typically work around it. But when we do get into the playoffs, when every minor detail can be exploited, I'm intrigued to see if the Chiefs are able to be competent enough on that left side with all the younger bodies they're going to have to, make that deep playoff run. I still think they're okay because at the end of the day, I still believe in this defense to hold any offense to less than 30 or less than 40, I guess, because of how good these offenses are. I still believe in Andy Reid. I still believe in Mahomes. Kelsey's probably on his last leg. I would not be surprised if this is his last year, but he's still Travis Kelce, and I'm sure he'll be fine. Rashee Rice, I think he's going to serve a suspension, but when he returns, he should be back to full health. He was a major loss for them because of how dominant he was early in the season. Let's see if he can return to form. Again, a couple questions with this team, but again, as with every team here, if this team can pass, the test, if they can check off the boxes of some of the concerns I have, which would be the left side of their offensive line, what does Rashee Rice look like? Can Justin Reed's replacement and Jaden Hicks look totally fine? If they can pass those, then I easily think the Chiefs are right back in the conversation. And even if they can't pass those, I still think they're going to be in the conversation because of how clutch Patrick Mahomes is and how good I think he is, that I think he'll be able to get the team there. It'll just come down to execution when they actually get to those spots. So in general, this Chiefs team, yes, they, in my opinion, took a small step back and probably have a bit more questions than what you would probably like. But I also think this Chiefs team has the formula and has the proven success of past years to, count on and rely upon. They're an experienced unit. They've been there. They've done that. I feel like I say that every single time when I talk about the Chiefs, but they truly have. They've won multiple Super Bowls, have multiple Super Bowl appearances, have dominated the Ravens and the Bills, and maybe not the Bengals to the fullest extent, but at times the Bengals, and have done all that in the playoffs. So if they can continue to impress me next year, then I think they could easily be my number one. But again, I think there's just a couple more questions than what I would like with this Chiefs team, and that's what holds me back from putting them number one. Because number one, I do have the Baltimore Ravens. Now, let's be honest, the Ravens have not been able to make that deep playoff run to the fullest extent. They've been a couple times to the divisional round, occasionally get a little bit further, but they haven't been able to, beat the Chiefs or consistently beat the Bills to make that Super Bowl appearance. And this is a shame because they've had the talent to do so. They have a ton of great pieces. Lamar Jackson is a multiple-time MVP, arguably could have won it last year, but they haven't been able to take that big step. Now, one thing I will say, I think the Lamar Jackson choking in the playoff conversation is not really that true. Now, early into his career, yes, you can make that argument. He had some blunders early into his career, but that's early version of Lamar. I'd say in recent years, while Lamar hasn't been like incredible, spectacular, like, bodying his team to that spot, kind of like Josh Allen has done in the past, I think he's been fine. And I think he's done the right things. I think he's making the right plays. And I thought last year, for the most part, I didn't really see anything from Lamar that made me question things. Like, let's remember, it was a 2-point conversion to tie the game up late in the fourth that Mark Andrews had in the breadbasket, and he dropped it. Had they converted that, they probably would have had the momentum, and arguably they could have won that game. I know it's a what-if scenario, but I just want to throw that out there because I think Lamar's been pretty solid in the playoffs the past couple years. Far from perfect, and he's made some mistakes, don't get me wrong, but I think he's been good enough to get them there. And as we look forward to this next season, I do look at this Ravens team as the team that, in my opinion, has the least amount of questions to answer. It's essentially the same team as last year, minus like a Patrick McCarry, which that will be a big loss. I have some general concerns with the offensive line and what that unit will look like, but because of how their style is, I'm not too worried about it. It's a very run-heavy team that if you can just get big bodies that can, get downhill and, be decent enough in pass protection, then you'll be fine. Again, just some slight concerns there. You lost Patrick McCarry. That's a big loss, but not generally too concerned there. Your weapons are not spectacular, but Zay Flowers is really good. Rashad Bateman's kind of coming into form a little bit. You brought in DeAndre Hopkins. You have two very good tight ends. You probably have the best or second best running back in the NFL. And then defensively speaking, you have waves of guys that can get after the quarterback with go-to guys as well, like a Kyle Van Noy, a Justin Madubuike, and we'll see what Mike Green can do. Your linebackers are returning from last year. They should be even better. Roquan Smith is a Pro Bowl, All-Pro guy lock every year. And then your secondary is just getting better and better and better. You just brought in Jair Alexander, too, and if he can stay healthy, then my goodness, this defense looks good. So you have all the pieces to get the job done. It just kind of comes down to that. You just have to get the job done. You have the pieces. You, in my opinion, have a solid enough coaching staff. You're experienced. You shouldn't get to the playoffs with shaky hands. You should be totally natural and totally comfortable. And I think it's kind of their year. I think they have maybe a 1 to 2 year window here and with this current roster to really get the job done. Now, that's not to say they can't win a title 5 years from now. They totally can. I'm saying over the course of the next 2 to 3 years with this specific version of the roster, with Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, all the guys on the defense, this is probably your best chance. Because in 2 to 3 years, Derrick Henry's probably going to retire. I think he wants to be able to walk when he's 70, right? Mark Andrews is probably going to be somewhere else or retired. And you look at other pieces around this, like Kyle Van Noy's getting a little bit older. Marlon Humphrey's a little bit older. Not saying he'll be retired, but, he'll be a little bit older. Everyone's kind of in the prime heading into this next season. Hopefully health goes their way because that is the ultimate factor for every single team. But if health is not a factor for this team, then I do think the Ravens have the best chance of winning the title here. I think they have the best roster in the AFC. And if you were to ask me who's my favorite to win the Super Bowl this year, I would say it's probably the Ravens. I do think the Ravens are the one team that could beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl, assuming the Eagles do make it that far and they don't slip up somewhere in the NFC. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to predict the Ravens to win it because the Ravens have also shown vulnerability in the playoffs in past years, and I can't just gloss over that. But I did just want to throw that out there that as of today, as of July 18th when I'm recording this, the Ravens are probably my favorite to win the title. I'm not sure if I'm going to predict them too because of some of the past blunders they've had. But it'll all be interesting. You let me know in the comment section below, what do you think of my top 5 AFC contenders and who are in your top 5 AFC contenders? Let me know down below. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.